Somewhere over the jungle of Indonesian Borneo, a man falls from a helicopter. He drops hundreds of feet into the rainforest canopy. 4 days later, searchers recover his body from the jungle. His name is Michael de Guzman, and he was the chief field geologist of the greatest gold discovery of the century. Within weeks of his fall, that discovery, a company once worth roughly 6 billion Canadian dollars, will be worth almost nothing, because there was no gold. There never was. The biggest gold strike in modern history turned out to be a hole in the ground, salted with river dust and shavings from jewelry. So how does a worthless jungle pit fool? Wall Street, the Toronto Stock Exchange, 2 mining giants, and some of the most sophisticated pension funds on earth. To understand that, you have to go back to a broke promoter in Calgary and a dream. In 1989, David Walsh founds Bre-X Minerals in Calgary. It is not impressive. It's a money-losing penny stock, a subsidiary of another small outfit called Bre-X Resources, trading on the Alberta Stock Exchange. Walsh himself is a stock promoter who has known hard times. The kind of man running a money-losing junior who needs a hit. He needs a story. A big one. Mining is the perfect arena for big stories, because a junior explorer can be worth pennies 1 month and a fortune the next. All it takes is finding something in the ground. Most never do. Walsh wanted the something that would change everything, and he found a geologist who said he knew exactly where to look. That geologist was John Felderhoff, a veteran prospector with a reputation for big finds in the Pacific. On Felderhoff's advice, in March 1993, Bre-X buys a property called Busang, deep in East Kalimantan, on the island of Borneo. The price, roughly $80,000. Pocket change. Felderhoff brings in a Filipino geologist named Michael de Guzman to run the fieldwork. But there's a problem. They drill, and they find essentially nothing. The exploration license is about to expire. Early tests show no economic gold. The whole thing is dying. And then, in December 1993, de Guzman comes to Walsh with a remarkable claim. He knows the exact spot to drill. The location, he says, came to him in a dream. It sounds like a fairy tale. In a sense, it was. Because right around the time of that dream, the samples coming out of Busang stopped telling the truth. Here's how the trick worked. In real exploration, you drill into rock, pull up a long cylinder called core, and send it to a laboratory that measures how much gold is in it. The numbers from that core are what the entire valuation is built on. So if you can fake the numbers, you can fake the discovery. De Guzman and a tight inner circle of Filipino geologists allegedly did exactly that. Over roughly 2.5 years, investigators say, they bought about $61,000 worth of alluvial gold, soft, rounded gold panned from local rivers by local miners, plus gold shaved from jewelry. They mixed it into the crushed rock before it went to the assay lab. And here's the crucial part. The original core wasn't preserved in a form anyone could retest. It was crushed. There was no proper chain of custody between the drill rig and the laboratory, so no independent party could ever go back and check the original rock. The labs were real and reputable. The numbers they reported were real measurements of fake samples. The salting even used realistic gold-to-rock ratios, rich but not absurd, so nothing looked too suspicious. Then, a respected engineering firm, Kilborn, ran those false numbers through standard geostatistical models, turning bogus grades into a giant, official-looking resource estimate. Fraud dressed in the costume of third-party validation. And the market loved it. Once the numbers started flowing, they only went one direction, up. In October 1995, Bre-X announces a deposit of around 2.7 million ounces of gold. And Felderhoff floats the idea this could be one of the world's great ore bodies. Then the estimate climbs. 30 million ounces. 60 million. 70 million ounces in Kilbourne's 1997 figure, with Felderhoff at one point suggesting it might reach 200 million. To put that in perspective, that would have been one of the largest gold deposits ever found anywhere. The stock followed the fantasy. In April 1996, Bre-X graduates to the Toronto Stock Exchange, opening at $187.50 a share. Walsh and his wife moved to an estate in the Bahamas. By August, the stock is on the Montreal Exchange and on NASDAQ in the United States. In December, Lehman Brothers calls it the gold discovery of the century. Big money piles in. The Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan, OMAs, Quebec's pension managers. Ordinary investors who'd never heard of Borneo bet their savings on it. At its peak, Bre-X shares traded around $280, split adjusted, and the company was worth roughly 6 billion Canadian dollars, built on a property they'd bought for 80,000. But a prize that size attracts predators, and the predators were now circling Busang. A deposit supposedly worth tens of billions was sitting in Indonesia under the rule of President Suharto, whose family and cronies controlled who got to do business there. So a fight broke out over who would actually own and mine Busang. Barrick Gold, the mining giant founded by Peter Monk, pushed hard for a stake. So did the American operator Freeport-McMoRan, run by James Jim Bob Moffat. Indonesian power brokers wanted their cut. When Barrick's deal fell apart, a Suharto crony named Muhammad Bob Hassan stepped in and brokered a final structure in February 1997. Bre-X would keep about 45%. Freeport would come in as operator with about 15%, and the rest would go to Indonesian interests. And as part of that deal, Freeport would do something no one outside the inner circle had ever truly done. It would drill its own holes, its own samples, its own labs. Independent verification was finally coming to Busang. There was just one complication. In January 1997, a fire of undetermined cause swept through the Busang site and destroyed the administrative offices, along with many of the sample and geology records. The timing fueled later suspicion, though no link to the fraud was ever proven. The original evidence was disappearing, and the one man who knew the project best was about to board a helicopter. On March 19, 1997, Michael de Guzman boarded a helicopter to fly out and meet the Freeport team. He never arrived. He fell from the aircraft into the jungle. His death was officially ruled a suicide, though to this day, the circumstances remain disputed, with theories ranging from suicide to murder to a faked death. What we can say is the timing. He fell just as the independent drilling was about to expose everything. And expose it did. Freeport drilled what are called twin holes, confirmation holes placed a meter or two from Bre-X's richest, most spectacular intercepts. If the gold was real, it would be right there. On March 26th, Freeport reported its results publicly. Only insignificant amounts of gold. Essentially, nothing. The panic began. Then, on May 4th, an independent auditor delivered the verdict. Graham Farquharson of Strathcona Mineral Services reported that the Busang samples had been falsified, salted with gold dust, and called it a fraud without precedent in the history of mining. Freeport withdrew. On May 7th, Bre-X shares collapsed to about 6 cents on a trading volume that set a Toronto Stock Exchange record. $6 billion gone. 2 days later, Bre-X and its sister companies filed for bankruptcy protection. The illusion was over. Now came the reckoning. Or rather, what should have been the reckoning. Here is the part that still astonishes people. For the largest mining fraud in history, almost no one paid. In May 1999, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police ended their criminal investigation without laying a single charge. They cited the difficulty of building a case when key witnesses and evidence were overseas, and the suspected mastermind was dead. David Walsh, the founder, never faced charges either. He died of a brain aneurysm in the Bahamas in June 1998 at 52. That left John Felderhoff. The Ontario Securities Commission charged him with 8 Securities Act violations, not criminal fraud, but regulatory offences. The case dragged on for years. And in July 2007, Justice Peter Hryn acquitted Felderhoff on all 8 charges. The court found the case against him unproven, and the OSC declined to appeal. Felderhoff had sold a large amount of Bre-X stock during the boom. Figures cited across sources range up to around $84 million. But those sales were never established as unlawful, and he walked away a free man. He died in the Philippines in 2019. And the investors? The pension funds and ordinary shareholders who lost everything. The Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan lost roughly $100 million. OMA's around $45 million. After 16 years of litigation, the class action settlement totaled about $5.2 million, to be divided among everyone. Pennies on the dollar. The final lawsuits were dismissed in 2014, roughly 17 years after the collapse. Billions lost. 0 criminal fraud convictions. So if no one went to jail, what actually changed? The lasting lesson of Bre-X isn't about gold. It's about verification. Strip away the jungle and the helicopter and the Suharto cronies, and the fraud survived for one simple reason. No outside party ever controlled or retested the original samples. The inner circle owned the rock from the moment it left the drill to the moment it reached the lab. And the instant someone else, Freeport, drilled their own holes, the entire $6 billion illusion evaporated in a matter of meters. The red flags had been hiding in plain sight the whole time. Results that were too good to be true. Primary evidence that kept disappearing. Crushed core. An unexplained fire. A tightly controlled group who alone touched the samples. When you can't independently check the thing a fortune is built on, you're not investing, you're trusting. And trust, without verification, is exactly what fraud feeds on. There's a second, quieter lesson too, about the limits of justice across borders. When the key witnesses are overseas and the suspected mastermind is dead, accountability can simply fail to arrive. So the real fix wasn't the courtroom, it was structural. Out of the wreckage, Canada created a rule called National Instrument as Fatherducho 101, which requires a credentialed, accountable, qualified person to sign off on mineral disclosures, with proper chain of custody on the samples. The system stopped relying on a man's word and on his dream, because the deepest hole at Busang was never in the ground. It was in everyone's willingness to believe.